Family, the most complex relationship of them all. Sometimes you love them, but most of the time you hate them. At family gatherings, there's always a creepy uncle, chatty aunt, pregnant cousin, and a hard-of-hearing grandparent. But that's okay, you just need lots of booze to get through the get-together. But what can you do? They're your flesh and blood. As they say, we are family. But what if your own flesh and blood robbed you of your very flesh and blood? Like literally, how would you feel if your killer is just a kid? Your kid. A kid whose diapers you changed. A kid you lulled to sleep. A kid you drove to and from kindergarten. And that kid you thought will change your life in the future will actually end your life and rob you of your future. Because that's exactly what happened in this first case. Case 1. Mendes Brothers Murder Trial. On August 20th, 1989, Jose and Mary Kitty Mendes were shot to death in their Beverly Hills home. The culprit? Their sons. The two brothers claimed self-defense for brutally murdering their parents after enduring years of sexual and emotional abuse. Emotional abuse from parents, I understand, but sexual? That night in 1989, Lyle and Eric Mendes shot their parents, Jose and Kitty, to death in the den of the family's home. After the crime, the brothers drove to Mulholland Drive, dumped their shotguns, and went to a local movie theater to buy tickets as an alibi. When they got home, Lyle called 911 to report that his parents had been shot and killed inside the home. When the police arrived, Lyle and Eric lied and said that they had been at the movies and found their parents dead when they returned home. It's kind of scary how smart they were about it. At first, the Mendes brothers were not immediately suspected. However, the guilt ate up at Eric, so he confessed his involvement to the psychotherapist Dr. L. Jerome Oziel, who taped the sessions in an attempt to impress his mistress. And that was when things started to blow up. The woman went to the police, which led to Lyle's and Eric's arrest in March 1990. As they say, women are men's downfall. I know that they would never ever have done what they did unless they felt that they had no choice, that it was either them or their parents, said Diane Vander Molen, Lyle and Eric's cousin, who used to spend summers with the family. At the brothers' first trial, Diane testified that Lyle confided in her about the alleged sexual abuse in the summer of 1976. At the time, Lyle was just 8 years old and Vander Molen was 17. Parents who do that are disgusting. You heard that? Disgusting. He used objects, a toothbrush and some sort of shaving utensil brush, Lyle testified. He'd rape me. However, Kitty's brother Brian Anderson found this idea preposterous. The idea that Eric and Lyle were abused by my sister Kitty is an absolute insanity, Anderson told ABC News. Fast forward to March 1996. After several trials and mistrials, the Mendes brothers were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 2 consecutive life prison terms without the possibility of parole. Now, here's a question for you. Do you think abusive people, whether physical or sexual, deserve death? Their victims might think so. And speaking of abused victims, take a look at this case. Case 2. Kanan Siblings Murder Trial. In 2010, a woman was accused of killing her mother and burying her in her backyard in 2003, 15 years after her father was murdered. The father, Richard Kanan Sr., was said to be a violent ex-convict. One even testified that Richard Kanan Jr. had to wear a dog collar as a child and was tied to the doghouse for days. Bro, what? Richard Kanan Sr. disappeared in 1988. In September 2003, his widow Marilyn Kanan didn't show up for work at Delta Connection Academy in Sanford, so her oldest daughter, Cheryl Bracken, called the sheriff's office to report her disappearance. When the police became suspicious, Ricky admitted to Stacy that their father's body was under the cement floor of their mother's garage and that their mother was buried in Stacy's backyard. Ricky then convinced her to commit suicide with him. However, deputies were able to rescue them and found suicide notes that led investigators to the bodies. At least something good came out of it. In May 2007, Richard Kanan Jr. pleaded no contest to manslaughter charges in his father's death and to second-degree murder charges for his mother's slaying and is serving 30 years in prison. However, Richard didn't seem keen on the idea that he is the only one to stay behind bars, so he threw his sister to the wolves, prosecutors in this case. As a result, Stacy Kanan was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and could face up to life in prison if convicted. However, Stacy maintained her innocence. In 2010, Stacy Kanan was found not guilty of killing her mother. The jury deliberated for 3.5 hours before siding with the defense. Sometime in 2013, Stacy said of her brother Ricky, "He lost reality somewhere. No surprise there. Now here's another question. Which angers you more, an offspring killing his parents with his own hands, or hiring a hitman to kill his parents? If you can't decide, let's take a look at the next case. Case 3. Christopher Sutton Murder Trial. On August 22, 2004, John Sutton, a successful lawyer, and his wife Susan Sutton, a former head nurse of a surgical intensive care unit, celebrated Susan's birthday and John's booming career. One of their adopted children, Christopher Sutton, and his fiancée, Juliet Driscoll, dropped in for the gathering before going to a movie. What a loving family, right? Not. What was supposed to be a fun-filled night became a scene out of a movie. Sometime into the night, John, who was sleeping in a separate room from his wife because he snored, called 911 to report that he'd been shot in the head. Before he was rushed to the hospital, John told the dispatch officers that he couldn't identify the shooter. Susan, however, was found dead after being shot 6 times. As jewelry and other valuables in plain sight were left untouched, investigators ruled out a burglary. It looked like the shooter came there to shoot Susan and her husband. She was executed, said Dr. Emma Liu, a medical examiner in Miami-Dade County, Florida. At first, John's partner at the law firm, Teddy Montoto, was suspected as it turned out that Teddy was having relations with Susan behind John's back. That said, it doesn't really make sense for him to kill both John and Susan. Others speculated that Teddy and Susan were having problems in their illicit relationship, which pushed him to kill Susan. As for John, people assumed that it was for the firm's recently won $1 million in settlement. However, no evidence pointed to him as the suspect in the shooting. But, as they say, nothing remains a secret. Coincidentally, less than 24 hours after the shooting, a man was arrested for assaulting someone with a gun, and it turned out that it was the very gun used to kill Susan and blind John. Garrett Cobb, who was brought in for questioning, told the police everything he knew. Christopher hired him to kill his parents. After that, the police had ample evidence against Christopher. There goes your freedom, Christopher. Now, why would an adoptive son want his adoptive parents to be killed? It turns out that Christopher harbored deep resentment towards John and Susan over constant battles over money and his irreconcilable bitterness over being sent to a controversial boot camp for troubled youth a decade prior. How did he keep it bottled up inside for a whole decade? When Christopher was arrested after being on the run for 2 weeks, he denied all the charges against him, but as he deserved, Christopher Sutton was ruled guilty by the jury and was therefore sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on July 21, 2010. And I say yes. Now, I have another question for you. Why haven't you subscribed yet? Kidding. Here's the real question. Which is worse, your adoptive son trying to kill you, his adoptive parents, or your actual son, your flesh and blood, killing you? I think the latter is more chilling, and anyone who'd do that is completely and seriously deranged, just like Grant. Who is he? Let's see Case 4, the Grant Amato murder trial. Yes, Grant Amato went on trial for the murders of his father, 59-year-old Chad Amato, his mother, 61-year-old Margaret, and his brother, 31-year-old Cody, in late January of 2019. If you're thinking Grant was abused too, you're wrong. In fact, he abused his family's love for him. Grant, a nursing school graduate who failed graduate school, was fired from his hospital job for stealing drugs. This resulted in his internet and sex addiction, which was the root of this tragedy. It was in late 2018 when Grant became obsessed with a Bulgarian webcam model named Sylvia. Long story short, Grant spent money that wasn't his to spend for Sylvie. Despite this, his family had his back and even helped pay for the debts Grant had accumulated and staged countless interventions to help him. But in January 2019, Chad, Margaret, and Cody were found dead inside the Amato home. Cody, dressed in his nursing scrubs, had been shot below the eye. Chad Amato, lying face up, had been shot twice in the head. Margaret, slumped over her desk, had been shot once in the head. In August 2019, Grant was found guilty on 3 charges of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. And if you think he's the only one who deserved a life prison sentence, you're wrong. Watch this to see how these cops deserve to rot in prison for what they did.